Hello everyone, it's Dr. Smith here, and today we're going to be covering Chapter 5 from your textbook, which will cover theories of child development. So remember, before you dive in, what are we going to do? We're going to cover our learning outcomes. So think about what you already know about these concepts. After completing Chapter 5, you should be able to apply knowledge of human development theories in school-age program settings, analyze individual developmentally related behaviors in order to explain and predict future behavior, explain the role of social and emotional need in progressive child and adolescent development, analyze the stages of cognitive development during young childhood through adolescence by comparing and contrasting elements of 3 different theories of human development, and apply knowledge of multiple intelligence theory to develop, implement, and evaluate developmentally appropriate lesson plans. Once you take some time to think about what you already know about these items, then you're ready to move on. Let's see what's next. So why do we have theories of child development? This chapter, for many of you who've taken child development classes before, is going to be somewhat of a review. But review is good because as we're working with children, there's so many child development theories and philosophies and research. And so it's really important for us to kind of brush up so that we can apply what we know, what new information is out there to the children that we are working with. So again, this might be a little bit of a review, but that's a good thing. You're probably going to also add on to things that you maybe have learned in prior classes before. So why do we have theories of development? So here are some characteristics of theories. They guide collection and interpretation of information. So the textbook talks about in the 19th century, Darwin and other theorists used these ideas and studied child development to sort of help support their views on evolution of the human species. So this idea of guiding collection and the interpretation of information, think about, for example, if a child gets a bad grade on a report card, if a parent subscribes to Carol Dweck's growth mindset theory and the idea that intelligence is malleable and you can, change outcomes based on the amount of effort that you put in to a task. So that parent might encourage their child to study differently, maybe get a tutor, maybe to ask for help. While another parent who maybe subscribes to the theory that intelligence is inherited, then they may not support their child in the same way. So this idea that theories help us to interpret the world around us and may dictate how we address certain situations. So that's one of the characteristics of theories. Another one is that it explains behavior, and that's probably one that we all kind of are familiar with, this idea that, well, why might a 2-year-old say no all of the time? Or why is it difficult for toddlers to share? Well, there are theories that help to explain those sorts of behaviors, right? And then we also can determine what behaviors are typical versus atypical. Also, theories should have a broad application. So that means that these theories would be universal across gender, across culture, across socioeconomic status. So they have a broad application. Also, the theories can be tested. So over time, would we be able to apply these theories and get similar results? Or can we check, kind of like hypothesizing? If A, then B, would that occur? So these theories can be tested. Because remember, a theory is kind of a belief based on patterns and research. Is not necessarily a fact, but it's a way of thinking. It's a paradigm to think about things and to understand the world around us. So can we test that theory? Also, there are different domains of development that the textbook talks about, and if you're familiar with child development courses, you probably know that these are some of the main branches of development that we talk about, different domains. So physical, growth and motor development, social and emotional development, cognitive development, and this 4th one you may not have always come across, but it's moral development. So this idea of what is wrong and what is right, what is moral and just. So first we're going to talk about physical growth and development through the lens of Arnold Gesell. Arnold Gesell was a theorist. He coined the maturation theory. Gesell wrote a book about ages and stages, and in 1911 he founded, it's called the Yale Child Studies Center, and they did lots of research there for decades, and a lot of his research that was uncovered in this Yale Child Studies Center, it's still used today. So he has something called growth gradient, and with his maturation theory, Gesell was heavily influenced by contemporary thought and therefore acknowledged the role of environmental factors while describing children's growth and development data in terms of an unfolding organic calendar. So if you look at the growth gradients in the textbook, and those are towards the beginning of the chapter. So I will tell you what page it's on. So if you look at these charts on starting on page 89, looks like this. It's actually quite helpful because I'm thinking about my 10-year-old, and if you look at the gradients for a 10-year-old, I'm thinking, okay, some of this makes sense. So it's a helpful guide for parents and those who care for children because it kind of gives you a benchmark for social emotional development, gross and physical development, and even hygiene. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. Then we have social emotional development through the lens of Erik Erikson, who is known for his psychosocial theory. So many of you are probably familiar with Erik Erikson from other child development classes, but let's go over some of his first several life crises. So we have stage 1, that's 18 months to about 3 years, birth to 18 months. That's basic trust versus mistrust. In parentheses, we have hope. That's the main kind of emotional concept behind that. And so when you think about a newborn, birth through 18 months, a newborn through toddler age, trust and mistrust is extremely important. So we're talking about attachment, we're talking about the different connections that the child has to the caregiver, and that initial attachment really kind of solidifies the concepts of trust and mistrust. So if my needs aren't met and I am expressing through crying or through words, and if those needs aren't met, am I going to trust that my caregiver is going to be there for me to meet my needs? So that's a very big established crisis in the earlier months of life. And then in stage 2, we have autonomy versus shame and doubt. Will is the main concept behind that, and that will take place between 18 months and 3 years old. So autonomy is this idea of independence. So if you're thinking about toddlers, and the main thing that you hear toddlers say are no, or I do it, right? So they're developing their own sense of autonomy. They want to be independent. They want to be able to do things for themselves. However, if things don't go the way that they want to, or a mishap occurs, then there's the shame and doubt, or they try to do something by themselves. Let's think about toileting, for example, potty training, and they're learning, their fine and gross motor skills aren't quite developed. They're trying to, take off their pants, and then they have an accident. And if they're scolded, then there's that shame and doubt. So can I do this by myself? And if I don't do it correctly, is there going to be shame and doubt surrounding it? Stage 3, initiative versus guilt. The idea of purpose, and this is usually around ages 6 to 12. So taking the initiative to create, to build, to problem solve, and then the guilt if your plan goes awry or doesn't go according to plan. There's a sense of guilt, like I didn't do it correctly. Did I fail? Am I good enough? And then we get to stage 4, industry versus inferiority. That's ages 6 through 12, this idea of competence. So competence in terms of, am I going to be able to achieve these goals, or am I going to feel inferior? And then stage 5, we have identity versus role confusion. That is the adolescent teen years, 12 through 18. And if we can think back to our development during that time between 12 and 18, and you can think about, wow, we're really going through all of these different stages, almost like metamorphosizing, right? Who are you? Who are you in relationship to your family, in relationship to your friends? You're exploring your identity. You're trying to figure out, who am I? And then this might lead to a lot of role confusion, because in those stages, our peers are very influential. Our peers are very important to us, and we're going through a lot of hormonal changes as well. And then in stage 6, we have intimacy versus isolation. That's age 20 through 34. And this is when our romantic relationships are very kind of central in our lives. And so we're figuring out what intimacy looks like for us versus isolation, what that looks like for us. And then next we have a theorist that some of you may not be as familiar with, Robert Havikhurst, 1900 to 1991, who focused on developmental tasks. So we expect to see children forming friendships and growing in confidence, according to Havikhurst. We help them to navigate interpersonal relationships with peers, teachers, and parents. And we scaffold children as they learn to develop their own rules for homework time, cooking activities, etc. Okay, next we have one of our most popular child development theorists, Jean Piaget, 1896 to 1980. He was a constructivist, and he is well known for his Piagetian stages of cognitive development. So this might be very familiar to you as well. So in the sensory motor stage, that's from birth to 18 months, everything is being explored through the senses, right? So little ones are touching things, they're smelling things, they're putting things in their mouth. They are able to identify and communicate through simple symbols. Pretend play occurs during this stage, and typically they're learning to walk during this stage. Then the preoperational stage is 18 months to 6 years. And in this stage, children are able to use logic. They're able to start looking at things from other people's perspectives, taking other people's point of view, and again, increasing their logic. And then the concrete operational stage is ages 6 to 12 years old. This is where children are increasing their ability to think logically. They're able to consider what-if scenarios, so with a higher level of critical thinking. And then finally, formal operational is ages 12 and up. This is where children can hypothesize, they can organize ideas, they can solve problems, and they can do so systematically. Lev Vygotsky, he's well known for the sociocultural theory of cognition. Howard Gardner, theory of multiple intelligences, and Carol Dweck is known for her ideas of mindset. We'll go into a little bit more detail next. So theories of cognitive development create environments that provide opportunities for independent and collaborative discovery learning at the ZPD, zone of proximal development. Zone of proximal development, I think, is a really fascinating concept. It's sort of this idea of what a child can do really easily independently, and the next level of what a child can do that's more advanced from where they are with a little bit of help. So it's sort of that sweet spot between what a child can do easily and independently versus a child being challenged. So that zone of proximal development is that sweet spot. So in other words, if you give a child a task that's too easy, they can do it easily. They're not really going to learn or push themselves or grow. If you give a child a task, or they're trying to learn a task that's too advanced, then they may not be able to achieve it, and they may get frustrated and overwhelmed and shut down. But if you give them just something that's just outside of reach with a little bit of assistance and they're able to achieve it, that sweet spot is the zone of proximal development. Also, you need to pay attention to the developing interests of children, right? So the children are guiding how we're supporting them. Use concrete experiences that help children grasp abstract concepts. So using what children know to help teach them what they don't know. scaffolding children's learning, so building from lower levels to higher levels, building with their prior learning. This is kind of what we do in the beginning of each chapter when I ask you to review the learning objectives first, think about what you already know, and then you can build new learning. So that's also scaffolding your learning. Give children tools to change their intelligence and quality. So giving them the resources to build and develop their schema and learn new concepts and increased difficulty in tasks. So B.F. Skinner, so now we're talking about learning theory, operant conditioning, which you may remember. Albert Bandura is known for social learning theory. So they use learning theories. Using the learning theory, Skinner felt that children learned from modeling only if they were reinforced immediately for a new behavior. So this is the idea that you're giving positive reinforcement. Child does something and you either praise them, you give them a treat, you give them a reward. So according to Skinner, he felt that they learned from modeling only if it was reinforced immediately after that new behavior. However, later learning theorists believe that children think about what they see, hear, and feel and make decisions about the behaviors that they adopt. So it isn't so simple as simply modeling. Children are thinking about it and making decisions about it. Also, moral development is kind of trailblazed by these theorists. Lawrence Kohlberg, who's known for moral reasoning, Carol Gilligan, The Ethics of Caring, Nell Noddings, Caring and Relationship, William Damon, Moral Development Through the Lifespan. Using theories of moral development, you want to talk with children about real quandaries, real problems and dilemmas in their lives. Be wary of any psychological model that is based on a single worldview, because we don't live our lives based on a single worldview, right? Oftentimes we kind of get caught up in our own bubble, and that might be a very narrow, a narrow-minded view, Eurocentric view. It could be a westernized view. So be wary about narrowed views, and it needs to be more open-ended. This one is one of my favorites. I love Urie Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. So through this ecological systems theory, through interactions with members of each generation alive today and their connections across the microsystems, children learn to evaluate the relevance and usefulness of the various messages of their elders, which may be in conflict with one another. But all of the systems have an influence. I love this. So if you look at this image here, we have the child in the middle, and this is the microsystem. So think of it as these series of rings, and inside the ring is the child, and what's inside the ring most directly impacts the child. And they interact on each other. The child interacts upon things in its microsystem, so home, sibling, parents, the school, and those things impact the child. And then we go a little bit further out the ring, and then we have the mesosystem, and those different things like home, school, neighborhood, religious setting, those things are influenced by impact the child, but the child also acts upon those things as well. We go into the next ring, the exosystem, so we're getting a little farther away from the child, but there's still a sphere of influence there. We have things like the school board, local industry, parents' workplace, mass media. And then finally, all the way in the outer ring is the macro system, and those are the dominant beliefs and ideologies of that society, that culture, etc. And so if you think about the child is in the middle in that macro system, but think about how through interactions within and between those different systems, we have this whole impact, this very intricate system of things that are happening. So even though it's just one child in the middle, think about how, subtly that child's influence is going through each of those spheres, from the micro inside all the way to the macro on the outer ring. It's pretty fascinating if you think about it. It reminds me of that concept of the butterfly effect. Butterfly flaps its wings, and the effects can be felt across the world. Okay, so that's basically chapter 5. So we're back to our learning outcomes. After completing chapter 5, you should be able to do all of these things. So hopefully after having read the chapter, after having gone through this PowerPoint, you're now reviewed and now you feel a lot more equipped to talk about theories of child development. Thank you.